To introduce our next speaker, I'd like to introduce a word that is critical to all of us. And in all of what we're doing today, right now in sales and marketing, it is critical to your success that we all become more agile. That whole word, being agile, being an agile organization, or for our Canadian friends, being agile organization, agility, being more agile, so critical. We need our employees to be more agile. As part of our communications practice, we recently did a whole seminar called Boosting Employee Agility. Our company's strategy needs to be increasingly more agile. Your sales strategy, so much more agile in today's world. Pace of change moving faster than it ever has in human history. We all need to be more agile. And our next speaker is the CEO of a company that is the undisputed leader in the whole idea of sales agility, the agile sales organization. They've taken the concepts and the discipline of agile technology and have applied them to create products and services that enable your company to achieve agile selling. As a tech company, they go way back. They were founded in 1999. You know, if you're in the tech community and your founding year begins with a 1, you're like a dinosaur. You're like the pioneers that came over in a Conestoga wagon. They've been around for a long time now. They're based in Chicago, and he is the CEO of a company that you should know called SAVO. Rhymes with Bravo. SAVO rhymes with Bravo. Keep saying it over and over again and you'll get it right eventually. So here to present the Agile commercial team, the benefits of fast cycling for your customers and you, please join me in welcoming Jason Liu.
I'm on top of the world.
All right, have fun.
Hey, well, thank you very much, Rick. I'm obviously very excited to be here, and I look forward to spending the next hour with you talking about a subject that I'm super passionate about, and I think after hopefully I share with you a lot of the information, you guys will get super passionate about the subject. So my name is Jason Liu. I'm the CEO of SAVO. And you know, if I'm in your shoes, obviously, the question you're probably asking yourself is, why do you care? Why do you care about Agile? And so maybe I can just kind of share with you kind of two different maybe reasons why you should care. You know, one is you completely buy into what I'm going to be talking about, and you truly do believe there is a new world order. And that if you don't change and you don't start adapting Agile and adopting it, then you're going to be less and less competitive. That's the belief that I have and the belief that I'll be talking about in my presentation, that there's a fundamental change in the marketplace that you really should be aware of. And it's already, as a tsunami, taken over the development of products, and it's now coming over how you should go about selling and marketing. If you don't subscribe completely to that, then perhaps you can maybe go a little bit couple volume octaves down, and just at least understand that you already are thinking and have been using principles of Agile, and you may not even be aware that you're using them. You know, things like, I want to be more responsive, I want to be more agile, or even concepts like lean prototyping, or concepts like piloting. Those concepts are really cornerstones of Agile, and you may not even know that they are, right? And the really question for you guys is then how do you then build a framework or a backbone to these concepts, right? And when I start talking to many of you practitioners, as I have been over the years, I kind of dig under the surface, like the concept of piloting, right? Everyone obviously wants to think about, do I pilot or not? But the question obviously is, why are you doing it? What's the critical mass that you need? Those type of pieces are really the underpinnings of Agile. And so hopefully by my next hour, I'll kind of give you maybe a framework to be thinking about how you can be more agile, that you can use to practical use. And I'm really going to try to turn this into not just concepts around how do you be agile, but how do you actually put that into practice and how do you actually build a framework to think about Agile. So before I jump into Agile, it probably is helpful if I kind of calibrate really how much do you really know about the concept of Agile development. So if I can just get a quick kind of calibration or poll. If you know a lot about Agile, please raise your hand. Okay, so about a fourth of the room. All right, so what I'll do is I'll probably maybe go and spend a little bit more time on really the principles and theories of Agile, and then I'll obviously spend even more time talking about how you apply them into a selling context, all right? So if you look at the New World Order, the world has changed. The world has gone from linear change to hyper change. I think you feel it. When you viscerally feel it every day, I think all of us are just a little bit more tense, just a little bit more paranoid. You know, I started running companies about 20 years ago, and life was a little bit simpler back then, a little bit slower. You know, if you think about 20 years ago when I first ran my first company, I really started thinking about, you know, how do you actually react to customer requirements and competitor changes, and things were a lot simpler back then. So think about something like about a product announcement. 20 years ago, you would wait for a trade show, right? And at the big trade show, your competitor would announce their new product launch, release. You would maybe see a press release. You know, there was no such thing as the internet back then. You would maybe get a fax, right? Remember faxes, right? That's how product announcements were announced 20 years ago. Well, what you see now, obviously, is a hypersensitivity and a hyper change element that's going on in the marketplace about how quickly things are being announced, right? Product announcements are happening rapidly, happening daily, weekly. Changes in customer requirements happen pretty dramatically. You know, Brent, I really liked your presentation. The only thing I would add to it is, you know, oftentimes the buying requirements of a customer changes rapidly even during a selling process, right? So how do you react to something that quickly that changes, right? And that's the world order we live in. And we just have to accept that that is what is going on, right? Because if you don't accept it, then there's obviously casualties, right? And at least I asked my marketing person to make sure that no one from one of these companies are here. Hopefully didn't get that wrong. If we do, I apologize. We will put another name up there next time. But you know, this is obviously a list you don't want to be on. These are companies that did not react rapidly enough to customer requirement changes and also competitor requirements, right? So our belief is that this world of hyper change is a reality. Change is exponential, not linear. And if you don't learn how to react and adapt quickly, this could be your fate, right? So really at the center of this, or at least at the epicenter of this, is Agile. And you maybe look at me and kind of scratch your head and say, why, right? Well, I think I'd propose a theory that Agile has been both a problem and a solution to this. At its core, Agile now is the standard on which engineering design happens, whether it's software, whether it's hardware. Even if you're a services company, the way companies now roll out services is your designers, your product managers are applying Agile techniques to rolling out service offerings. So the world is Agile from a new offering and a product and a service perspective. And that has created a significant acceleration and new products and new features being added into the marketplace at exponential rates. So from your own sales enablement, of enabling your own sellers, enabling your own partners, enabling your own customers, you have to keep up with this pace just for yourself, right? You have to keep up with this rapid pace of new product innovation within your company. But your competitors now are doing Agile as well. And so they're releasing products faster, they're releasing services faster. And how do you keep up with all this, right? Well, Agile has been creating the problem, but I'd argue that Agile presents an opportunity to be a solution in this matter, right? And then if you start adopting the principles of Agile in your selling organization, you can get in front of this curve and start riding the wave rather than having to be crushed by it or reacting to it. So, you know, the question is like, why do I know so much about Agile, right? Or why do I know so much about this theory, right? So maybe I give a little bit of a bio on me, and at least hopefully it'll give you a sense of where I come from. So I've been fortunate. I've been kind of at the cross-section of Agile and selling for the last 10 to 20 years. So I won't say last 10 years, but for about 10 years I was running companies that sold software into the application development market and the IT operations market. So we sold products for Agile. So I was running one of the largest software companies in Central Europe, a company by the name of UC4 Atomic. I ran that for about 4 or 5 years, and we were a leader in selling software into this marketplace. And we had a lot of success. And then from there, I've done other things, including I'm now currently on the board of a company called CollabNet, which is one of the largest, little plug for them, they're one of the largest providers of application tools that sell to application development environments, and they're one of the largest trainers in Agile. They're based in San Francisco. So I've been in this industry of agile development, selling products that are all based around agile. So I have that kind of foot in that camp. Then also as a sales practitioner, SAVO is now the 7th company I've run. I've been very fortunate. A lot of it's been luck, but all 7 companies I've been involved with have had exponential growth. And I'm typically the guy that gets brought in by a private equity fund to really help the company grow to that next level. And so as you might imagine, some of it has been luck, but some of it has been how do you create repeatable results? And that is all around mechanizing the sales process and the demand waterfall, but also from a selling productivity standpoint, how do you mechanize that into a set of steps? So that's certainly how my mind works, is how do you mechanize all this and how do you create a framework that you can repeat? It's using the golf analogy. If you can actually get your swing down, you can make sure that you can repeat that swing, right? And so that's really been, kind of the world that I lived in, is around the selling world. I'd also argue that in at least 3 of the 7 companies, I actually took the role of CSO in order to kind of instill a lot of these principles. So I've kind of had this leader of Agile and the seller hat. And that really culminated in the last 18 months as being the CEO of SAVO. We're the largest player in the sales enablement space. And I've had an opportunity to actually go out and meet hundreds, if not thousands of practitioners, people in your chair, people in your seat, and really learn from you guys. And so I feel like I can maybe straddle both worlds of both Agile and sales practitioning and really apply these concepts to practice. And the last thing I'll say about this kind of cross-section of where I've been is that this is not a new concept that at least we've been thinking or I've been thinking about. About 7 years ago, 5 to 7 years ago, I started applying some of these principles in that German company I was running many years ago, and it started really kind of honing and experimenting with these concepts. And so I feel like now I have about 5 or 7 years of programmatic results of this, and I can talk a little bit more pragmatically about it. So that's kind of the expertise that I bring to the equation. The only other thing I would mention is just I always like giving an icebreaker. So maybe you'll allow me to take a slight detour and share a quick story. And it's really just about, it's a harmless story that'll take 30 seconds, but it's really about, speaking and why I enjoy, having these type of conversations. I enjoy having these type of provocative conversations. At the very least, it creates a level of engagement. It's more of a dialogue. I will say the most stressful public speaking engagement I ever had was actually at this German company where their big customer event was Oktoberfest. Have you been to Oktoberfest in Munich? All right, it's a great event. So if you go to these beer tents, there's about 3,000 to 5,000 people in these tents, right? Singing German beer songs, a lot of alcohol, you might imagine. So as the new CEO from an American CEO in a German company, they decided to have fun with me. So they liquored me up with a lot of beer. And then all of a sudden I found myself being pulled through a crowd, and I ended up on the front stage of the entire tent in front of 3,000 to 5,000 people. And I had to lead everyone into German beer songs, all right? So we have some German beer songs ready to sing? No, I'm kidding. But as you might imagine, that's a stressful situation. I was a 6-foot Asian guy wearing lederhosen, singing German beer songs in front of 3,000 to 5,000 people. I can tell you, nothing puts you in a more stressful situation than that. So to me, this is easy. But let's get back to Agile, okay? So, before I kind of talk about, how to get in front of this, what are the causes of these problems, right? Or what has caused this hyper change? And I'd argue there's 3 trends that have contributed to this hypersensitivity or there's hyperactivity with change. The first one is that the buying process of your customers has now been consumerized. So in the past, 20 years ago, I would argue that customers bought separately. Enterprise, when you had your consumer hat on as a person, you'd go out and buy in a certain way. Then when you'd show up at work, you would buy in a separate way. Well, that wall is broken down, and now people buy in consumer-like ways in the enterprise B2B market. And there's some micro trends of that. There is self-taught, there's connected, there's transparency. And let me maybe just delve into this to get a flavor of it. The first is really the buyers are self-taught. I think you've seen some of these stats. 94% of them conduct research online. 50% of the journey is done online. So you've heard that now 57% of the buying process is done online. 43% of this is done with a sales individual. Everyone's seen these stats, right? So the implications obviously are interesting. So how does that how does that fact, these people are doing this research online before they even talk to a sales rep, influence customer and buying requirements? Well, I would argue that one of the reasons, or one of the impacts of that, is that in a selling process, you actually end up finding out buying requirements much later in the process, and you have to then react. So you're able to not get in front of these like you used to. And the second part of it is that you have less ability to shape these buying requirements. Many of these requirements are being shaped in front of you. So you got to then be able to be very quick in your ability to react and to adapt to these changing requirements as they're happening real time. The second idea that's out there is this whole concept of why opinions and requirements are changing so quickly, is this idea of the social network. And that's a phenomenon that's only about 5 to 10 years old, is that now people are buying in networks, that your customers are talking to their peers, maybe not in their company, they're talking to people in their network. They're talking to other CSOs or CIOs, and that's how they get a lot of their ideas on what they're ultimately going to buy. Are people familiar with a book called The Seventh Sense? It's considered one of the hot business books right now. It's a pretty interesting book, but it's fundamental concept. I'll probably ruin the book for you, but its fundamental concept is that the major way to gain power now in the 21st century is through controlling these social networks. It's a very interesting idea. And if you don't believe me, you just look at some of the stats. I mean, obviously you look at how Arab Spring happened and how quickly that sprung up, where millions and millions of people got connected and started obviously creating some interesting situations for some governments, things like Black Lives Matters. But even you look on the celebrity side, do you know who the most popular Twitter person is in the world right now? It's Katy Perry at 93 million followers, right? The next one, Justin Bieber. Yep. Taylor Swift is number 3, and then our President Obama is number 4 at 74 million followers. But the point is that Katy Perry could influence buying requirements much faster than she could 100 years ago, right? Or 20 years ago, right? And that's the world we live in, and that change is obviously impacting and influencing the buying patterns of the marketplace. And the last is really transparency, right? I think loyalty used to be definitely something you could count on in the B2B buying world. Now, obviously, some of that loyalty is obviously changing. So the first kind of hyper change that's gone on is the consumerization of the buying process. The second hyper change that's gone on is that digital content change is everything. And this is really around the concept of technology. If you look at the amount of the world has changed, I'm reading this book called Sapiens. It's a pretty interesting book, but it's all around how humankind has evolved over the last 20,000 years. And what you'll find out is that it's exponential, not linear. And what you find out, what's interesting about the concept is that just in the last 20 years, the world has evolved more than it has the last 2,000 years. And this is a lot of it's due to technology, right? And so if you think about now the ways in which information has been communicated, obviously with social media, Twitter, things like that, information now communicated in milliseconds, no longer in days, months, or even back in the Greek and Roman days by horse, right? So technology's obviously created this hyper change activity that's going on. And the third thing, as I've maintained earlier, is the impact of Agile and the product development process, right? Agile accelerates the product development process, whether you're selling software, hardware, or services. Agile now is the standard. Now, this is just a stat that 91% of companies now apply Agile techniques to their engineering design cycle. The old way of doing things was kind of Waterfall. And it drives faster results. So I won't go through all these stats, but the most telling one is the last stat, which is that 43% acceleration in cycle time. So products are coming out now 50% faster, and there is a Moore's Law effect, that every year and every day that goes by, things accelerate, right? That the ability to build products faster now accelerate. What you see in a lot of web applications, if many of your businesses, you have a strong component that's web app based, Now changes are happening daily or even monthly, or not monthly, by the minute. There's now a thing called micro-targeting that allows websites to change and evolve now on a minute-by-minute basis rather than on a monthly or quarterly basis like things in the past. So things are changing fast. And this has created, as I said, what we perceive to be a sales tsunami. These changes have really put a lot of stress upon you and your selling organizations to keep up. And so the question obviously is, how do you react? How do you keep up with enabling your sales team, with enabling your channel partners, many of which speak foreign languages, obviously, ESL. Many of them obviously are just learning your products. They're carrying other products. So how do you keep them enabled? And how do you also keep them enabled not just for your own products, but also objection handling versus your competitors? And so what I'm gonna try to give you now is maybe a framework to think about it. But before I do that, I want to give you a little bit of a history on Agile. I think many of you, this is maybe your first introduction to Agile. So give you a little bit of history lesson on Agile. Agile is only, roughly about 15 years old. It was started in Utah, in Provo, Utah, or Park City, Utah, excuse me. There were 17 developers that got around and wrote 12 principles of the Agile Manifesto. And really what they were reacting was they started recognizing this hyper change was happening, and they wanted to get ahead of it from a product development perspective. And so they kind of put together these 12 principles. And the old world that they lived under was a waterfall world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how products were developed in a waterfall world, but it's applicable to many other functional areas in your own companies. So in a waterfall world, the way products were built 10 or 15 years ago was that you started out and you had an idea on you're going to build a product a year or two from now, let's say 2 years from now. And the first thing you would do is you'd create an MRD, which is a marketing requirements document. And that basically says that you would go out and survey the marketplace, you'd go talk to your customers, you'd understand the market requirements, and then you'd write an 80 to 100-page document that was called an MRD. And that would kind of lay out the high-level concept of your product idea. And then you would then build a product requirements document, which was a detailed set of specs that would say this is what your product's got to look like. And then you would throw it over the wall, and then you'd give it to your engineers. And then your engineers would then start developing. In software and hardware, they would start designing and developing. And that may take a year or two. And then once they were finally done with it, they would then take the entire thing, they would put it into QA, which is quality assurance, testing, and then they would be done. And that's how the world worked, this waterfall world worked, and that's how products were developed and designed. The problem with doing that was quite profound. One huge problem with that is by the time they were done, it took them 1.5 years to 2 years, a new competitor came out with a new set of requirements, and now your requirements are no longer valid or no longer relevant, and you just spent 1.5 years developing a product that may no longer be needed, right? And so those problems are quite severe. Another problem was, if you're truly trying to do something very creative and innovative, how do you really know what the product requirements are going to be 2 years from now? How do you really know what color the customer wants or the design of the button? You don't know. And so to start 2 years ago and assume that you have perfect clarity with design and development 2 years in front of what a customer wants was a little bit, I think, too idealistic of a belief. And the third problem with the waterfall approach was this problem was that you design 100 or a couple hundred pieces of functionality, and then at the end, one of those functionality is not done, and so your project gets delayed because one of the 100 features is not done, and then delays beget delays, right? And that's how product design went on, obviously, for decades, and what you guys got used to, right? But the world changed, obviously, with Agile. Now the world is all around incremental changes, incremental functionality, and fast cycle time. And the results are obviously quite profound. Agile development is now 3 times more successful, at least 50% faster than the prior development cycle. So, here are the 12 principles of Agile. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to try to sum them up into kind of 3 key themes and try to apply it to a selling context. But this is really the kind of the principles of Agile that really govern the approach. And so, unfortunately, I'm going to be provocative and say the marketing and sales organization lives in a waterfall world. I know it's a very provocative statement. I'm curious, did many of you subscribe to that? I don't want to offend anyone, so maybe in your organization you are agile. But I will say, after talking to hundreds, if not thousands of folks, I would argue that the world is still a waterfall world. Let me give you an example. When you roll out a new product, okay, and you want to enable your sales organization, your channel partners, most companies, what I see companies do is they get in a room with their marketing people, maybe their sales op people, and they start creating all the list of documents and training they think their sales teams need. They got to do it in an ivory tower. And then they set up a sales training. Oftentimes this is in person. They fly everyone in, and then they just kind of say, here it is, right? Here's all the material you need. You're fully trained. See you, goodbye. You're done. We're perfect, right? And then your sales organization's like, well, They go try it out, and they realize that some of it is relevant, some of it's not relevant. And then they realize, some of this is outdated. Maybe a competitor has this feature, and you guys thought they didn't have this feature. Or when I go out and try this new messaging, it's not working with my customers. And that's the world we live in, right? Is there's almost this waterfall approach where we do all this enablement on the front end, we train the people, and then we think it's done, right? And I'd argue that's a waterfall approach, and I'd argue that's how most people run their organizations. Now, I don't know your particular organization, so I don't mean to be provocative or offend anyone, but that's typically what I see. And so I guess what I would argue and start getting you guys to think about is, how do you start applying lessons of Agile to your selling organizations, right? So one major theme of Agile is the concept of a minimum viable product. And so where I do differ from many people at Agile is people that are pure Agile believe that every single development process should be a minimum viable product. What I would argue is that if there's a clear set of customer requirements, it doesn't have to be Agile. But if it's a new innovative type area, then you really need to think about this. And so what does a minimum viable product mean is, instead of building the product to completely it's done, you develop to about 20%. You really identify the pure concepts, and then you go out and you start working with stakeholders to refine it until it's a finished product, and then you release it, right? So you go out with a prototype, a lean prototype, which is 20% of the concept. You go start working with your customers. You start asking what the buttons should look like, what the colors should be. Do you like this or not, this feature? And then over time, you then finish it off. And then when it's finally done, when it's 100% done, that's when you release it into the marketplace. So how does that apply to a selling context? Well, I can tell you from a personal story. When I was running this company in Germany, we were selling into a mature market. We decided we wanted to create a growth engine to the company. And so we decided we want to sell into an adjacent marketplace with a new offering. And we went out and made an acquisition, and then we also built some product on it. And instead of just doing a traditional waterfall approach to enable our sales and our selling organization, we kind of said, this is a new market, this is a new product. We've really got to be much more kind of thoughtful around this. And so what we did is we tried to find a stakeholder group that was very small, and we tried to do lean prototyping to really refine the messaging before we rolled it out to the entire group, right? And so how did we do that? Well, we looked at our sales organization, and we recognized that a lot of our selling organization was in Germany or in Asia. They probably weren't good candidates for this. In US, not sure. So we ultimately found a group in the UK that was extremely entrepreneurial, extremely innovative. And what we started doing, we started working with them to really refine this messaging, right? And so we started refining this prototyping concept. And what they started finding out was that there were certain positioning statements that didn't work. There were certain pricing packages that didn't work as they started talking to customers in this small kind of prototype. And we started realizing that we needed to change. And so over a course of about 3 to 6 months, we went through this prototyping exercise. And then ultimately, we had a finished product. And then at that point is when we rolled out to the entire organization. And we had a lot of success with it because we had worked out a lot of the problems and the kinks before we rolled it out to a large-scale organization. So that theme around minimum viable products and lean prototyping is something that I think you could apply to a selling organization, and it's been obviously a tried and true strategy in the development world. Now, perhaps I can maybe talk about it, another key concept, which is your users, collaborate with users. And I think what I would encourage you to start thinking about how maybe you can start testing your positioning statements, your objection handling with competitors. Test it with sellers, especially your challenger sellers, but also test it with customers, your close customers. Get their ideas on how potentially you ought to maybe tighten your messaging, tighten your packaging, tighten your go-to-market. And that'll kind of help you, I think, get to a finished product that I think is more fully baked. And then the last one I would say is that, obviously use this at a fast cycle time. So don't feel like you need to bite off the whole thing at once. Break this into smaller chunks and iterate on those type of things. So those are some of the key lessons of Agile. Now, to sum up, instead of designing minimum viable products, I think what we're saying is design minimum viable messaging, design minimum viable processes, collaborate with buyers and sellers to make it better, and then use rapid cycle time to iterate. Now, what I'd like to do is now take it from the principles which I've outlined and maybe talk about it in a programmatic sense, because I think it has applicability beyond just messaging and positioning. So if you think about it from a program standpoint, what I encourage you to think about is, think about which of your sales processes or programs really won't change or shouldn't change on an annual basis. Then think about which ones are probably going to change on a quarterly basis or on a real-time basis. So what I'd argue, if you're doing from a positioning standpoint messaging, that certainly doesn't change on an annual basis. But on a quarterly basis, your competitors, your collateral, that's going to change in a more agile-like way. And certainly objection handling as well. But I'd even argue sales processes should be thought of this like this as well. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, when I run sales organizations, one of my biggest things is territory plans. And I would argue that historically, territory plans are thought of as in a waterfall approach. You write a territory plan at the beginning of the year, you have your sales reps do that, and then you maybe look at it once a quarter. But it's a document that is really considered an annual document. I'd argue that territory plans change much more rapidly than that. And there's a whole discussion I could have with you over drinks about how I started writing territory plans now that are agile, that take a minimum viable concept. You go out in the first several months of the new territory being inherited, and you experiment with it, and then you bake it, and then you ultimately have a hardened territory plan that really has a lot more strength and a lot more firmness than if you try to bake the entire thing at the beginning of the year. But as I said, I would encourage you to start thinking about this, is that which of your sales programs and sales processes could, in theory, apply more to an agile concept than a waterfall. I'll throw one that's very taboo, is could even think about commission plans. Oftentimes people build commission plans at the beginning of the year, and they find out that ultimately it doesn't apply in the quarter, or they end up changing the commission plans during the year. Arguably, there's ways to build commission plans that are much more agile, but that's a subject for another day. So what I'd like to do maybe is turn the discussion now from, I talked about principles, I talked about programs around Agile. I would like to talk about technology. And you can spend a lot of time, when Agile hit the development world from a product standpoint, there became a bunch of software and tooling that had to be built around more of an Agile approach. So in this case, the implications could be across a lot of different technology elements. But what I will say is, the one I'd like to focus on in this particular case is sales enablement and content, which is obviously a topic that we're pretty passionate about. And I'd like to maybe give you a sense of how we think that the whole way in which you enable your sellers is now fundamentally changed, and there's got to be a new way of doing things. And so what I'd like you to think about in this new world order is that the winners and losers of this world order have already happened. The winners in this world, of this new world of sales enablement 2.0 and content, has already happened. And those winners are the content websites. It's probably not what you think. I'll repeat that again. The people that have won in the sales enablement world are the consumer content websites. And people don't probably shake their head like, what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about it, the average person now, billions and billions of people, spend about 1 to 1.5 hours a day on one of 10 specific content websites. And that's what they expect their content websites to look like. So if you think about it, there's 15 of the top websites. 10 of them are all content websites. 5 of them are feed-based. So that is like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Those are feed-based. You access the content through a feed. The other 5 are all content channel-based. That's YouTube, Hulu, even Amazon is content-based. And as a consumer, that's what you're used to. And then when you show up in the work world, there's a disconnect, right? I'd argue that the analogy of this habitualization of consumption of content is like utensils, right? So you're out there in the consumer world and you're eating with a fork and a spoon, and then you show up in your business world and they give you a SharePoint site and they throw the content in there and they're basically saying, here's a toothpick, right? So go out and start, eating the food with a toothpick, right? And you're like, well, no, I'm used to, a spoon and a fork, and now I go here and you want me to use a toothpick? There's obviously a disconnect, right? And I'd even argue that there's this thought that maybe the content should be served up in a CRM. What I would tell you is you think about it, in a CRM, that real estate is about 1.5 inches. And I'd argue that that is too small of a real estate to have a truly interactive visual experience, right? So there may be use cases in which it's applicable. So we've done a lot of analysis, and we've looked at about 150 million transactions. What we found out is there's 6 use cases for consuming content, of which only 1.5 of them are optimized to access content in the CRM. And that's because the real estate is just too small. So if you think about using the toothpick analogy, if you're just trying to use appetizers, a toothpick is the right utensil, right? But if you're trying to have a rich sit-down meal that is a dinner, you're going to need something much more engaging, much more visual-based, much more interactive. And where the disconnect happens is in your consumer world, you see that 1.5 hours every day, and then you show up in the work world, and that experience is different. And I argue that disconnect has not always been there. 10 years ago, the experience that someone had around content was actually better in the work world than it was in the consumer world. In the consumer world, if you wanted to access a movie, you would go to Blockbuster. If you went to access a book, you would go to maybe Barnes & Noble. And then when you went to your work world, you had some pretty cool content management sites, like SharePoint, or you had pretty interesting content from Vignette and some of the other players there. But now this gap has changed where the consumer experience is dramatically improved, and in the enterprise world, it's not. So if you don't believe me, I would tell you there's one other major tsunami coming that's going to further exacerbate this uneasiness feeling amongst your sellers. And that is the rise of the millennials. Millennials make up now 35% of the workforce. Millennials, if you know, they're between 15 and 29, right? So within 3.5 years, 50% of the workforce is going to be millennials. That's the reality. And they obviously operate differently. They're different animals than, obviously, many of us that grew up in later ages, right? And they're going to expect their technology to work in a certain way that's much more agile and much more consumer-based. So the world order that we believe, this new world order of sales enablement 2.0, really has 3 main elements, which I'd like to talk about. One is a personalized experience. A second one is predictive, which is machine-based learning, and a third one is a connected experience. So what does a personalized experience mean? Well, I think you see it every time you use YouTube where it recommends content, like they figured out that I like sports, they keep recommending sales content or sports content to me. It's a very personalized experience. The look and feel is personalized. It's cool graphics, right? That's the experience I think people are used to in the consumer world, and they want their enterprise world and enterprise applications to look like that. The other piece of it is they want the predictive element, right? And what I mean by predictive element is there's a whole now wave of things around machine-based learning, artificial intelligence. I think obviously Salesforce stole my thunder a week ago with Dreamforce. I think this is absolutely a major trend that's going on in the marketplace, is machine-based learning and predictive analytics. I had someone yesterday ask me kind of what ultimately does it mean. So if you don't mind, I'll kind of geek out on you and just talk about what predictive analytics is that ultimately there's a scoring algorithm. So you have data scientists that write a scoring algorithm, and then that scoring algorithm applies scores or points to behavioral tendencies and points. And the more the score goes up, the higher the rankings go, right? And so this machine-based learning obviously has already happened in the consumer world. So that is how Google works, right? When you do a Google search, it doesn't just give you a blind search. It already has learned your tendencies and its preferences, and it's directed the search to your individual buying patterns, right? It's how Amazon works. It's how all these consumer sites work. And I think Salesforce has made the right decision to apply it in a CRM perspective. Now they're applying it to data, pipeline data. I'm talking about this in the context of content, right? And so you're already used to this idea in your consumer experience. When you use YouTube, it already recommends videos that you have preferences to. When you're in Amazon, it recommends books that you already, it says if you like this book, you like 3 others. You've already been habitualized to view content in this way. And this is all based on this machine-based learning scoring algorithm. And that's clearly what we believe in Work Events, where the world is going, is all around predictive analytics, scoring algorithms. And the world gets even more interesting when you apply it to the connected world. Is that in the connected world is now you start applying different applications together so you get a much more thoughtful recommendation. Now, in the content world, the initial vision that I think we believe happens in the marketplace is that you get connected to your calendaring, and all of a sudden the content that is served up is tied to the meeting that you have tomorrow. So if you have a meeting with USA Bank tomorrow, your system already knows that you're meeting with USA Bank, and the content is served up that way. Eventually, you tie into things like LinkedIn, where you know that the person you're meeting with is not just from USA Bank, they're also the CMO, and the content that you want for that CMO at USA Bank looks like that. If you don't believe me, that's where the world works. What I would argue is, that change has already happened in the personal world. If you look at your iPhone, has everyone downloaded the 10 OS? Have you noticed, you probably have, that it now is going into your calendaring and knowing what meetings you have, and then it's looking at the traffic patterns, and now they're telling you if you're going to be late to a meeting when you're driving? If you notice that it started when you download your 10 OS? So for those who've not downloaded it, basically it's going into your calendar, it knows where you're going. I knew I was going to the airport yesterday and there's congestion, and then it told me that I was going to be 5 minutes late because the congestion in the airport, right? Well, that's the way the world is going. It's already happening on your iPhone, and that is going to permeate through all business applications. And obviously that is why Microsoft bought LinkedIn. That's why obviously Salesforce is acquiring is announcing their Einstein. But also in the content world, those same principles apply to the content world, and we're absolutely convinced that that's directionally where the world is going. So what I'd like to sum up, and then so I put a stamp on this whole world of sales enablement 1.0 and 2.0, and then I'd like to wrap up. So, our belief is that from a technology standpoint, this change of consumerization and agile is going to impact all of your selling technologies and all of your marketing technologies. And you could argue and make discussions about how it's going to change, but we specifically talked about how we think it's going to change within an area that we have particular unique expertise, which is sales enablement. Our belief is that this concepts of connected, predictive, and consumerization, that's going to apply to all of the tools, whether they be in sales enablement or in other areas as well. And our belief is that that's where the world is going from a technology standpoint. So, in order to kind of just wrap up, maybe I'd like to maybe just kind of get you guys to think about the next gen of where the world is going. And before I talk about this quote, I'm going to give you an exhibit of where I think the world could be going, if I haven't scared you enough already. Where I think the world is going is, the exhibit is my 16-year-old son. So my 16-year-old son is actually a pretty good kid. He studies pretty well. He's a pretty good athlete. But he's really the millennial generation, right? And who has teenage kids? Good. Have you started studying how they act and behave? It's fascinating. It's not like how I acted at that age, or how you may have acted. It's fascinating. So I got the dreaded call from the parents last month where they were caught shooting off fireworks. Have you got that call? Okay, well, I got that call. And I certainly obviously reprimanded my son like any good parent would do. But what was really interesting is we started talking about like, how did this decision was made? How did you get your group of friends? And it was very interesting to see the military precision that my son and his friends had done to kind of set up this fireworks escapade that they did, right? So it started out with a series of texts that they sent to each other. They then sent videos to each other via their group sharing app, right? Then they decided to, using their Meetup app, they decided to meet at a certain place. They filmed the entire event on their phone, posted it to Snapchat, right? And then shared it with all of their friends at their school, right? That's how they set up planning. That's how they set up organization. And what's interesting about it is this was entirely visual, video, audio-based with a little bit of texting. And if you think about our business world, we're very heavy email-based, right? We're very centric and text-based. And I guess I would challenge you to think about, how does the world change when my son, 16, or his friends now enter the workforce and they become the largest workforce ever in the US or in the world, right, as the millennials? How does that change when 50% of your workforce is like that? You can think of some pretty interesting scenarios. I'll give you one, which is the concept of call notes. I mean, whenever, in my company, whenever we do a big meeting, we'll go to meet a customer, we'll type up call notes, we'll send it out via email, we'll maybe kind of post them into our CRM system. How do you think my son would do it and his friends, right? Email, no way. They would never do that, right? What they would do is maybe a couple of texts, great meeting, then would they maybe do a video, right? And then they would share that video of the meeting with their peers in their group. And that's how they would expect things to happen, right? And so when I talk about content, I'm not just talking about sales literature, brochures, training videos. One could argue that the content of the next generation are these micro videos, right? People consume content now in 30 seconds, 4 minutes, or 17-minute increments. Once in a while, it'll be an hour. But there's biological reasons why people consume content. It has to do with your chemical and the releasing of the chemicals in your brain of how you process. So think about how people consume and realize that this next generation of millennials that are going to come to the workforce may profoundly change the way in which I think people actually act in the sales and the marketing organizations. So let's get to the quote, right? So, I thought I'd kind of leave with a quote, which is, I didn't make up this world order, this change. I'm just a messenger, right? And telling you how I see it. And I think we all can learn something from, Socrates, right? Which is, the secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new, right? And so there is a new world order that's changed. It's a hyper-change world. And so how do you react? How do you adapt in this new, ever-changing world? And I'd argue that the principles of Agile become a backbone for how you can react faster and get ahead of things. So I want to thank you. If you give me 15 seconds, I'll give you the shameless infomercial. I definitely am interested in talking to you. If you want to show up at booth 15, I'd love to talk to you about this more. I have a lot of thoughts and would love to hear your thoughts. SAVO obviously is the largest player in the space, and I think what I encourage you to do is stop by and see a demo, because this new software we have that really addresses this new environment, this consumerization of sales enablement, is pretty cool, it's sexy, and what you'll find, it's very intuitive, all right? Thank you very much.
I'm on top of the world. I'm on top of the world.
Nicely done. Jason Liu, everybody, from SAVO. All right, our last opportunity to help you plan the rest of your day. Plan your work and work your plan. Here's what's coming up. A little bit different from yesterday. If you recall yesterday, when we departed here from the Chelsea, we all sort of went off in our own direction and then followed a bunch of different plans, and everybody had their own scheme for the breakouts and the sessions that they wanted to attend. Today, a little bit different, because we will be taking a break now, and we will be having lunch in the Gracia Ballroom just like yesterday, except now we're going to come back again here at 1 o'clock in the Chelsea. And you'll have a chance to hear from our keynote speaker, Bob Moesta. What a cool and interesting guy he is. And if you think about Brent's theme of really rethinking customer understanding, he's going to pick that theme up and run with it. He's come up with a very clever, strategic, and surprisingly human way to understand customers and to understand people. Everything that he shares with you, we think will be directly applicable to the work that you're trying to do. So that's at 1 o'clock. So enjoy your break, lunch, and then we will come back here at 1 o'clock. Then later on at 2:30, you have your choice of 4 CEB Insight sessions. You see 5 up there, but let me explain the 4 that we have available for you. Driving value through sales ops and enablement. That's going to be hosted by Dave Anderson, who's a wonderful presenter. Preventing stalled deals through smarter sales process. Liam Kelly from our UK office, also a fabulous guy. A blueprint for content marketing success. Shelley West, also an amazing presenter. Does that just sound redundant when I tell everybody they're all so great, everybody, my teammates, I love everybody at CEB. They're all just such cool and wonderful people, and you will enjoy any one of these sessions. Disrupting Customers Thinking at Hilton, that's going to be hosted by Pat Spenner, who's one of the co-authors of The Challenger Customer. The CEB Technology Lab session, that was a pre-registration session, and that has sold out. That ended up being super popular, so if you're registered, you're absolutely welcome. And if you hadn't, select from one of those other 4 CEB Insight sessions. Then coming up at 4 sponsor sessions. You'll have a chance to meet the people from Brainshark or the people from Demandbase. Salesforce has a presentation. Microsoft has one of the sessions. So again, plan your strategy. Go as a group, divide and conquer, but try to put a little bit of thought in so you select exactly the right session for you. And then we will all come together again this evening for our networking night out. And I'm telling you, if you've never been to the Marquee, it is a spectacular venue, and it is perfect for everything that we'd like to do tonight, to get together, to have some fun. There will be more than a few beverages, I assure you, and also some great food. And as you're looking at this photo, you ever have that experience of going on a hotel website, or I'm old enough to have said hotel brochure? Remember those, all you old people like me? Hotel pictures, and you then get to the location and you say, that does not look at all like the photo on the website. This photo, this location, it looks exactly like this. It's cool, it's lit up beautifully, it's tropical, there's palm trees, you're right out over the strip. A really wonderful venue, and I assure you, please do come tonight prepared to have a good time, and a good time you will have. The only thing we need to ask you is you'll need to get a wristband that we'll be handing out later on this afternoon. That is the price of admission. Of course, there's no additional cost for anything here at the summit, but you will need a wristband in order to attend the party, so don't put yourself in a position of getting hassled. Your ID, if you're young looking, doesn't require an ID in my situation, but your ID and a wristband is all you need to get into the networking night out tonight. And one other thing that's going to happen tomorrow, we will be giving away a grand prize. And somebody who attends our 11:45 session tomorrow called The Path Ahead will win a VIP trip to come back here to the Cosmos. So if you've enjoyed your stay here and you've been thinking, man, I'd love to bring my spouse, or I'd like to come back and try to win some of my money back, that is available to you because we'll have a grand prize winner, including a 2-night stay, limo transportation, and a beautiful suite here in the Cosmo. But that will be given away live and only to those who attend our 11:45 session tomorrow called The Path Ahead. And so with all that, thank you for all of your attendance, for all of your energy this morning. And remember, take a break, enjoy some lunch, and we'll be back here in the Chelsea at 1 o'clock. See you then.
Headed for the open door.